but you have spoken about AGI and the existential risks around it, and sort of based on your intuition that we're quite far away from that being a serious concern relative to the other concerns we have. Can you maybe unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So as I understand it, for example, I read Bostrom's book and a bunch of other reading material about this sort of general way of thinking about the world. And I think the story goes something like this, that we will at some point create computers that are smart enough that they can help design the next version of themselves, which itself will be smarter than the previous version of themselves, and eventually bootstrapped up to being smarter than us, at which point we are essentially at the mercy of this sort of more powerful intellect, which in principle, we don't have any control over what its goals are. And so if its goals are at all out of sync with our goals, like for example, the continued existence of humanity, we won't be able to stop it. It'll be way more powerful than us, and we will be toast. So there's some, I don't know, very smart people who have signed on to that story, and it's a compelling story. I once, now I can really get myself in trouble. I once wrote an op-ed about this, specifically responding to some quotes from Elon Musk, who has been, on this very podcast more than once. And
AI summoning the demon. I forget.
There's a thing he said, but then he came to Providence, Rhode Island, which is where I live, and said to the governors of all the states, you're worried about entirely the wrong thing. You need to be worried about AI. You need to be very, very worried about AI. So, and journalists kind of reacted to that, and they wanted to get people's take. And I was like, okay, my belief is that one of the things that makes Elon Musk so successful and so remarkable as an individual is that he believes in the power of ideas. He believes that if you have a really good idea for getting into space, you can get into space. If you have a really good idea for a company or for how to change the way that people drive, you just have to do it, and it can happen. It's really natural to apply that same idea to AI. You see these systems that are doing some pretty remarkable computational tricks, demonstrations, and then to take that idea and just push it all the way to the limit and think, okay, where does this go? Where is this going to take us next? And if you're a deep believer in the power of ideas, then it's really natural to believe that those ideas could be taken to the extreme and kill us. So I think, his strength is also his undoing, because that doesn't mean it's true. Like, it doesn't mean that has to happen, but it's natural for him to think that.
So another way to phrase the way he thinks, and I find it very difficult to argue with that line of thinking. So Sam Harris is another person from a neuroscience perspective that thinks like that, is saying, well, is there something fundamental in the physics of the universe that prevents this from eventually happening? And Nick Bostrom thinks in the same way, that kind of zooming out, okay, we humans now are existing in this like time scale of minutes and days, and so our intuition is in this time scale of minutes, hours, and days. But if you look at the span of human history, is there any reason you can't see this in 100 years? And like, is there something fundamental about the laws of physics that prevent this? And if it doesn't, then it eventually will happen, or we will destroy ourselves in some other way. And it's very difficult, I find, to actually argue against that.
Yeah. Me too.
And not sound like you're just like rolling your eyes. Like, I have like
it's science fiction. We don't have to think about it.
But even worse than that, which is like, I don't know if kids, but like, I got to pick up my kids now. Like, okay.
I see. There's more pressing short term.
Yeah, there's more pressing short term things that like stop it with this existential crisis. We have much shorter things. Like now, especially this year, there's COVID. So like any kind of discussion like that is like there's there's pressing things today. It's and then so the Sam Harris argument. Well, like any day, the exponential singularity can occur. It's very difficult to argue against. I mean, I don't know.
But part of his story is also he's not going to put a date on it. It could be in 1,000 years. It could be in 100 years. It could be in 2 years. It's just that as long as we keep making this kind of progress, it's ultimately has to become a concern. I kind of am on board with that. But the thing that the piece that I feel like is missing from that way of extrapolating from the moment that we're in is that I believe that in the process of actually developing technology that can really get around in the world and really process and do things in the world in a sophisticated way, we're going to learn a lot about what that means, which that we don't know now because we don't know how to do this right now. If you believe that you can just turn on a deep learning network and it eventually give it enough compute and it'll eventually get there, well, sure, that seems really scary because we won't be in the loop at all. We won't be helping to design or target these kinds of systems. But I don't see that. That feels like it is against the laws of physics because these systems need help, right? They need to surpass the difficulty, the wall of complexity that happens in arranging something in a form that will happen in.
Yeah.
Like I believe in evolution. Like I believe that that there's an argument, right? So there's another argument, just to look at it from a different perspective, that people say, well, I don't believe in evolution. How could evolution, it's sort of like a random set of parts assemble themselves into a 747, and that could just never happen.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, that's maybe hard to argue against, but clearly 747s do get assembled. They get assembled by us. Basically, the idea being that there's a process by which we will get to the point of making technology that has that kind of awareness. And in that process, we're going to learn a lot about that process, and we'll have more ability to control it or to shape it or to build it in our own image. It's not something that is going to spring into existence like that 747, and we're just going to have to contend with it completely unprepared.
Now, it's very possible that in the context of the long arc of human history, it will in fact spring into existence. But that springing might take, like if you look at nuclear weapons, like even 20 years is a springing in the context of human history. And it's very possible, just like with nuclear weapons, that we could have, I don't know what percentage you want to put at it, but the possibility of
could have knocked ourselves out.
Yeah, the possibility of human beings destroying themselves in the 20th century with nuclear weapons, I don't know, you can, if you really think through it, you could really put it close to like, I don't know, 30, 40%, given like the certain moments of crisis that happen. So like, I think one like fear in the shadows that's not being acknowledged is it's not so much the AI will run away, is that as it's running away, we won't have enough time to think through how to stop it.
Right. Fast takeoff or FOOM.
Yeah. I mean, my much bigger concern, I wonder what you think about it, which is we won't know it's happening. So I kind of
that argument. Yeah.
think that there's an AGI situation already happening with social media, that our minds, our collective intelligence of human civilization is already being controlled by an algorithm. And like we're already super, like the level of a collective intelligence, thanks to Wikipedia, people should donate to Wikipedia to feed the AGI.
Man, if we had a super intelligence that was in line with Wikipedia's values, it's a lot better than a lot of other things I can imagine. I trust Wikipedia more than I trust Facebook or YouTube as far as trying to do the right thing from a rational perspective.
Yeah.
Now, that's not where you were going. I understand that. But it does strike me that there's sort of smarter and less smart ways of exposing ourselves to each other on the internet.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that Wikipedia and social media are very different forces. You're right. I mean, Wikipedia, if AGI was Wikipedia, it'd be just like this cranky, overly competent editor of articles. There's something to that, but the social media aspect is not. So the vision of AGI is as a separate system that's super intelligent. That's one key little thing. I mean, there's the paperclip argument that's super dumb but super powerful systems. But with social media, you have a relatively, like, algorithms we may talk about today, very simple algorithms that when so something Charles talks a lot about, which is interactive AI, when they start like having at scale like tiny little interactions with human beings, they can start controlling these human beings. So a single algorithm can control the minds of human beings slowly to where we might not realize. It can start wars. It can change the way we think about things. It feels like in the long arc of history, if I were to sort of zoom out from all the outrage and all the tension on social media, that it's progressing us towards better and better things.
Mm.
It feels like chaos and toxic and all that kind of stuff,
It's chaos and toxic. Yeah.
but it feels like actually the chaos and toxic is similar to the kind of debates we had from the founding of this country. You know, there was a civil war that happened over that period, and ultimately it was all about this tension of like something doesn't feel right about our implementation of the core values we hold as human beings, and they're constantly struggling with this, and that results in people calling each other like just being shitty to each other on Twitter. But ultimately the algorithm is managing all that, and it feels like there's a possible future in which that algorithm controls us into the direction of self-destruction, and whatever that looks like.
Yeah. So all right, I do believe in the power of social media to screw us up royally. I do believe in the power of social media to benefit us too. I do think that we're in it's sort of almost got dropped on top of us, and now we're trying to, as a culture, figure out how to cope with it. There's a sense in which, I don't know, there's some arguments that say that, for example, I guess college-age students now, late college-age students now, people who were in middle school when social media started to really take off, may be really damaged. Like this may have really hurt their development in a way that we don't have all the implications of quite yet. That's the generation who, and I hate to make it somebody else's responsibility, but like they're the ones who can fix it. They're the ones who can figure out, how do we keep the good of this kind of technology without letting it eat us alive? And if they're successful, we move on to the next phase, the next level of the game. If they're not successful, then we're going to wreck each other. We're going to destroy society.
So you're gonna, in your old age, sit on a porch and watch the world burn because of the TikTok generation. That
I believe. Well, so my kid's age, right, and certainly my daughter's age, and she's very tapped in to social stuff, but she's trying to find that balance, right, of participating in it and in getting the positives of it, but without letting it eat her alive. And I think sometimes she ventures, I hope she doesn't watch this. Sometimes I think she ventures a little too far and is consumed by it. And other times she gets a little distance. And if there's enough people like her out there, they're gonna navigate this choppy waters.
That's an interesting skill actually to develop. I talked to my dad about it. I've now somehow this podcast in particular, but other reasons, has received a little bit of attention. And with that, apparently in this world, even though I don't shut up about love and I'm just all about kindness, I have now a little mini army of trolls.
Oh,
it's kind of hilarious actually, but it also doesn't feel good. But it's a skill to learn to not look at that. Like to moderate actually how much you look at that. The discussion I have with my dad is similar to, it doesn't have to be about trolls. It could be about checking email, which is like if you're anticipating, there's my dad runs a large institute at Drexel University, and there could be stressful like emails you're waiting. Like there's drama of some kinds, and so like there's a temptation to check the email. If you send an email and you and that pulls you into it doesn't feel good. And it's a skill that he actually complains that he hasn't learned. I mean, he grew up without it. So he hasn't learned the skill of how to shut off the internet and walk away. And I think young people, while they're also being quote unquote damaged by like, being bullied online, all of those stories, which are very like horrific. You basically can't escape your bullies these days when you're growing up. But at the same time, they're also learning that skill of how to be able to shut off disconnect with it, be able to laugh at it, not take it too seriously. It's fascinating. Like we're all trying to figure this out. Just like you said, it's been dropped on us, and we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I guess I've become a believer in the human design, which I feel like I don't completely understand. Like, how do you make something as robust as us? Like we're so flawed in so many ways, and yet We dominate the planet, and we do seem to manage to get ourselves out of scrapes eventually. Not necessarily the most elegant possible way, but somehow we get to the next step.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I'd make a machine do that. I generally speaking, like if I train one of my reinforcement learning agents to play a video game and it works really hard on that first stage over and over and over again, and it makes it through, it succeeds on that first level. And then the new level comes and it's just like, okay, I'm back to the drawing board. And somehow humanity, we keep leveling up and then somehow managing to put together the skills necessary to achieve success, some semblance of success in that next level too. And, I hope we can keep doing that.